Mike Evans is nearly a lock to find the end zone multiple times in week 1 against the Commanders. We dig into the best wide receiver starts for week 1 of the fantasy season on today's episode of Locked On Fantasy Football.
You are Locked On Fantasy, your daily NFL fantasy podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into the Locked On Fantasy Football Podcast. I'm one of your co-hosts, Michelle Magdziuk, and when I'm not doing this, I'm a researcher and fantasy analyst with NFL Network.
And I'm your other co-host, Vinnie Iyer, and when I'm not doing this, I'm writing about NFL fantasy and betting for sportingnews.com. Check out all the week 1 content, fantasy, and picks there on the site now.
Yeah, we're 2 days away from the NFL kickoff game. We need to set those week 1 lineups, and that's what we're here to help you do. We went through all the best running back starts on yesterday's show, so if you missed that, go listen to it after this episode. Today, we're going to hit on all the best wide receiver picks, right? Now, if you were to anyone that you drafted in the first few rounds, we get it. You're playing them in week 1. That's cool. But we're going to also just help you find out maybe some of the best players of the week, some players that you maybe drafted late that you should get into your lineup. So we'll get into all that fun stuff. Before we do that, I want to let you know that today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game time. All right, let's start right at the top here, because obviously if you have Tyreek Hill or Von Ra or CeeDee Lamb, any of those guys, they're going to be in your lineups. But I did want to hit on Justin Jefferson super quickly, because we're both not scared of Sam Darnold at all in week 1, right? We're saying Justin Jefferson with Sam Darnold is going to be elite. You have him as your wide receiver 2 in week 1. I have him as my wide receiver 3 going up against the Giants. There's nobody on that Giants defense that's going to be able to cover Justin Jefferson, and Sam Darnold's going to be able to get it done against that defense with JJ.
Yeah, I also think that Justin Jefferson might be the only means mostly of moving the ball here. This could be an ugly game. I think this could be one of those games where Justin Jefferson has 7 catches, 150 yards, and can't score, right? This is that type of game where he's almost the entire offense here for the Vikings. And with Sam Darnold, he's a lesser quarterback. That was a big debate. Do we trust him with Sam Darnold, J.J. McCarthy? That was the whole question about Justin Jefferson dropping him into the wide receiver 4-5 overall range, right? That's where he was in most places. Now, that said, you drafted him early. You're playing him. Now, again, I don't expect a lot of points in this game. You got Sam Darnold versus Daniel Jones. There's a decent Giants pass rush with Kayvon Thibodeau and Brian Burns, but the secondary stinks. Both these teams are actually very good in the pass rush, but they're back-end issues galore. They're trying to figure out these guys in the secondary. So Jefferson's going to have a great matchup. He's going to go off. I like it. And again, I think this is going to be desperation for both teams trying to move the ball. And I think that means the number 1 players are going to have to come through.
Yeah, and we saw Jefferson come through with Nick Mullins last year. The 3 games played, he averaged nearly 140 receiving yards per game, was the wide receiver 6 and wide receiver 1 overall in 2 of those 3 weeks with Nick Mullins. So Justin Jefferson will be great, I should say, in this matchup. Now, we're both super, super high in Mike Evans. He gets the Commanders. Now, it is hard to say any team's going to be as bad as they were the year prior, right? Like, things change quickly in the NFL. However, the Commanders were so bad in the secondary last year, I don't know if they could possibly have fixed it in one offseason, but they allowed the second most fantasy points to wide receivers last year, allowed the most receiving touchdowns to wide receivers. And I mean, Mike Evans is a touchdown machine. So I have him at wide receiver 5. You have him at wide receiver 7. I might end up actually pushing him up, maybe over like AJ Brown. So maybe wide receiver 4, but how does he not score twice in this matchup?
Yeah, I mean, he has a good chance to do that. I mean, this Commanders team did invest quite a bit on defense, but it was more in the front 7 with guys like Dorrance Armstrong, Frankie Louvu, and then they got Jeremy Chin at safety, but they lost Kendall Fuller and Cameron Curl back there, 2 very good players, 1 safety help and 1 starting corner. So when you look at that, they're in bad shape in the back end. This is a solid Commanders defense, and I think they'll overachieve a little bit with Dan Quinn, but nothing so scary as we had in Dallas because they had Deron Bland and somebody shut down players there, which the Commanders do not. So Mike Evans should have a big game. This, unlike the Vikings-Giants game, this is the sneaky high-scoring game that I would watch out for, because There's always a little bit behind the eight ball with Cliff Kingsbury and his offense and the defense trying to catch up to him. So, and the Bucs are not the Bucs defense. They lost Carlton Davis. Their pass rush is limited, so there could be a shootout there, which also is great for Mike Evans and Baker Mayfield. This could be a relatively high scoring game. And if there are scores in this game, Mike Evans is likely to have 1.5 of them at least in this one.
Literally, like, yeah, that's where I think a majority of his points will come from, or just those big chunk plays that he's going to get in these games. Love Mike Evans this week. Definitely a great DFS play for him. Now, there's two guys that I'm much higher on than you, and you're expecting them to disappoint in week one due to where you drafted them, right? So I have Devo Samuel as my wide receiver 11, Nico Collins as wide receiver 13. I really like their situations in week one and their matchups. You have Devo down at wide receiver 25, Nico Collins at wide receiver 23. I'll say the reason I really like Devo Samuel against the Jets, I know how good of a defense they are, but Sauce Gardner, I think, would mostly focus on Brandon Ayuk, right? Like they're going to move Devo Samuel all over the place. One area you can beat the Jets is in the run game. So Devo could get some of those carries, especially with CMC coming off injury. Ayuk's just getting back. I expect them to heavily target Samuel with those short passes. And the one area the Jets like passing defense struggled last year was yards after the catch. They allowed the fourth most yards after catch per reception in the league last year. Devo's the best at yards after the catch in the league. So I think Devo's going to be at plenty of touches and be able to break some of those tackles. So that's why I like him at wide receiver 11. And Nico Collins, he absolutely destroyed the Texans in both games last year. That doesn't mean he's going to do it again. But week 18 last year, 195 receiving yards, career high for him. And then also 146 yards in that week 2 game with a touchdown in both of those games. Like he's just been on fire against that team. And if what's his name? Juju Brents. If he gets Juju Brents again, Collins absolutely destroys that kid. So I like his matchup as well.
Yeah, this one is interesting. I think I have Devo down at 25 just because I don't think this is going to be a points extravaganza against the Jets. And you're right, make some good points. Another thing about the Jets you're going to watch out for is getting the ball out quickly, stopping the ball from going downfield. So this is not great for Brandon Ayuk because you see Sauce Gardner and Rock Purdy's under pressure, but I mean, shorter passes to Devo, get the ball out of his hands, uses work after the catch, as you mentioned, a weakness of the Jets defense. But I'm being a little conservative because, again, I don't expect this to be something that closes the week strong on Monday night with a lot of points. It's just two defenses on the field that are very good. So that's where I have him dropped. And Nico Collins is more wait and see. I want to see what happens now. Stephon Diggs is there, Tank Dell. How does this affect what they're trying to do here with all their weapons? And they have Joe Mixon now in the backfield. You can't forget about Dalton Schultz. This team doesn't have a lot of vacant targets. So I kind of want to see how it plays out a little bit. I think the toughest matchup definitely is in the slot for Tank Dell against Kenny Moore, but there are some openings on the other side. So I do like the concept of Collins. I'm going to be conservative with these situations that have multiple wide receivers, but then again, in the end, we both have these guys as plays this week, at least as wide receiver twos.
So I'm going to call you out here because on your next one that we disagree on, you're very high on Cooper Kupp versus the Lions at wide receiver 6. It does make sense because that's a nice matchup. You're expecting him to bounce back. I have him lower at wide receiver 25. I want to see the bounce back before I'm going to start putting up again as a top 10 guy. That's really my reasoning there. And like Cooper Kupp was non-existent, basically. I mean, they tried. They gave him 9 targets in that wild card game, but ended up with 5 receptions, 27 yards. I want to see him bounce back before I'm like, I need him in my lineup. I still have him as a somewhat of a wide receiver 2 play. But then you have DJ Moore versus the Titans as your wide receiver 10. Talk about wanting to see the situation. He has a rookie quarterback. He has brand new wide receivers with him in Keenan Allen and Roma Dunze. So that's why I have DJ Moore down at wide receiver 27 because I have no idea how he's going to be utilized in this new offense.
Yeah, here's what I like about DJ Moore. The matchup could favor him really well. I mean, they have Chidobe Awuzie, but he could be more on Roma Dunze in this game, and that could be very tough. But DJ Moore, they can move around a little bit. I think you'll see that here. And Keenan Allen will be on the field quite a bit. We know this is going to be 11 personnel base here for Shane Waldron. But I think DJ Moore, he got paid. He's the alpha here. He's going to try to come out here for Caleb Williams at home, feel that energy, make plays. He's typically a very spectacular home receiver wherever we've had him. So I think Moore comes out and says, okay, I'm going to establish myself for Caleb Williams. The Titans defense can be had on the back end. They're actually a pretty good run defense up front with Jeffrey Simmons and some of the things they can do there. So you got to pass on them quite a bit. Their secondary is vulnerable. DJ Moore is going to get the volume. So I think there's going to be a separation. Again, I like Odunze a little bit more later in the season. I think Keenan Allen is a guy that is going to be sometimes available, but DJ Moore is still the alpha. That's why he got paid that way in the offseason. Again, you establish yourself a little bit as an alpha in week one. And then Cooper Kupp, I think I'm buying into the hype here of his preseason. Everyone is saying he's the centerpiece of the offense again. Puka Nacua has hurt a little bit. Cooper Kupp is going to be the fully healthy Cooper Kupp we haven't seen in a little while, in a couple of years since that Super Bowl. So I think they're going to do that. They're going to come out established, throw a ton against the Lions, by the way. They're going to have to do that, and probably from behind. So I think Kupp and Nacua both go off in this game.
Yeah, I could see that. I like Nakua a lot more, right? I have him higher, but with the knee injury, Cooper Kupp could bounce back. Maybe he wasn't healthy last year fully, like he says he wasn't, and he did miss time. So there's definitely an opportunity there for him. I'm happy with Cooper Kupp as my wide receiver too, or flex. Just don't have him as high as you. Now we have two rookie wide receivers that we're happy to play this week. We're going to get into that in our second segment when we talk about guys that maybe you drafted in the middle rounds or later on that we're happy as our wide receiver twos for the week in week one.
This episode of Locked On Fantasy Football is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. That's America's #1 sportsbook. You've heard us talk a lot about FanDuel because of that reason. We have something a little bit different and special for you now through September 22nd. Yeah, you have a few weeks stacked on this. All FanDuel customers, that's all FanDuel customers, can get $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. That's fantastic, right? We want to see how our bets are going, how our fantasy players are doing early in the season. What better way to do that than having access to all the games? With the YouTube TV base plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out-of-market game. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment, and you can cancel anytime. Just visit FanDuel.com, download America's #1 sportsbook today, take advantage of that offer, and get that trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. All right, let's continue, and let's get excited here to talk about these two as plays for the very first time as fantasy players. Marvin Harrison Jr., Malik Nabers. We've talked a lot about how we love both of these guys. Michelle, break it down here. What do we get? Harrison versus the Bills, Nabers versus the Vikings.
Yeah, so I brought up that we're going to be talking about solid wide receiver 2 plays, but really you have Marvin Harrison. We both have Marvin Harrison Jr. as wide receiver 1s because you have him right at the edge there at wide receiver 12. I have him at wide receiver 10. Now, Malik Nabers, you have just outside your top 12 wide receivers at 13. I have him more down at 19 just because of the whole Daniel Jones thing. I'm a little nervous to put him too high too soon. But the Vikings matchup for Nabers is fantastic, right? Like that's a big reason why we like Malik Nabers. They had the 6th most fantasy points per game to wide receivers last year. They've lost some secondary pieces as well. They also lost Danielle Hunter. We'll see how that affects their pass rush and getting to the quarterback. But they also allow a wide receiver to have 100+ receiving yards and a receiving touchdown in each of their last 3 games played last season. So Malik Nabers, I think, comes out and has a really solid game. That's why I have him at 19. And then Marvin Harrison Jr., we're both super high on him. I guess it's not the easiest matchup against the Bills, but I do expect this to be a high-scoring game. The Cardinals are going to have to put up points. And I just said immediately they're going to feed Marvin Harrison Jr. I think he's that special of a talent that it's not going to take time for him to start to come on.
Yeah, I'll start with Nabers here on this one and echo my thoughts there. I really like the matchup. The Vikings really struggle. Now, they are built to rush the passer and create some takeaways, but they're going to give up yards in the process. And I think that's where Malik Nabers, you're going to have to count on that for a while, right? If the Giants offense is explosive and scoring a lot of points, you'll take it because I think you'll get 10 to 12 targets from Nabers. So you will be rather efficient. So you could see a lot of passes to Jefferson and Nabers in this game from the 2 quarterbacks really trying to establish something, get the ball downfield. So that's a sign off there, and that's why I love Nabers here this week. Now, Marvin Harrison, look, I want the same things. The matchup is a little bit more difficult, but you can throw on the Bills secondary if you want to. And again, volume-based play. So it's not just the talent we like on these guys. I think what also helps is the volume. And then we like Harrison a little bit more because his quarterback is a little bit more reliable. But again, these rookies are going to be treated as number 1s in every which way, getting the targets, these teams are probably going to trail in a lot of games, and that's also going to happen here. But matchups, the talent, everything lines up here in week 1.
Absolutely. I'm excited to get both of those guys in my lineup. I was excited to draft them, so I'm going to just plug them in and trust it. Now, another guy we were big on, two guys actually that we were big on throughout this offseason that we want in our lineups, and especially if they can be our wide receiver twos, I think that'd be perfect. Devonta Smith versus the Packers and Terry McLaurin against the Buccaneers. I have Smith. We both actually have Devonta Smith at wide receiver 16. You have McLaurin at 15. I'm a little bit lower at wide receiver 21, but I want him in my lineup, right? Both great matchups for them, and both games we expect to be some of the higher scoring ones. Now, are you worried at all about the Brazil game that maybe with the travel and all the stuff that goes into it and like the wildfires going on, like maybe the atmosphere is not as great? Like, could this Packers Eagles game be way more low scoring than we expect, or you're not worried about that at all?
Yeah, this is a problem I have sometimes with the league putting a game like this of such magnitude and such fantasy potential, selfishly, in the tough situation, right? Just send a game that we don't care about that much to Brazil. People will still watch it, right? But we care about this game a lot, not just for fantasy, but reality. It's a marquee matchup between Jordan Love and Jalen Hurts. We want to maximize the offensive potential. I think the NFL does want it too, right? They want to see some scoring. But yeah, the circumstances, I think this team will be okay. Let's get into the matchup where I look at, all right, the Packers have Jair Alexander. He's been up and down of late. We'll see what he does. They'll probably try to take away big plays from A.J. Brown. We know they can move DeVonta Smith into the slot a little bit. We know that's going to be an expectation of the Kellen Moore offense. So they'll move around, get him open. A.J. Brown getting vertical might be a little bit more difficult in this game. So I think this could be a nice DeVonta Smith volume game in terms of catches and yards and in touchdowns. You need a big play in a lot of cases to get that from him. But I like that. And then you look at Terry McLaurin, another big play receiver. You look at all the metrics last year, he was a very good big play receiver. He just had no one to get him the ball for big plays. It was dink and dunk with Sam Howell. Too many short passes with Eric Bieniemy. Cliff Kingsbury is going to get vertical. Jaden Daniels has a big arm. And Carlton Davis is gone. So a big corner that can maybe slow down Terry McLaurin. He's been gone to the Lions here. So I do like this matchup quite a bit for him as well.
Yeah, the Buccaneers already with Carlton Davis last year allowed the fourth most receiving yards to wide receivers. So losing pieces and one of your best ones it's not great there. Yeah, I think Terry McLaurin has a very, very solid week 1. Now, a guy I like a bit more than you. I think he can have a huge week 1. It's DK Metcalf against the Broncos. I have him at wide receiver 15. You have him at wide receiver 24. I'm really excited to see him in this new offense under Ryan Grubb, right? From Washington, we saw how that there's such a heavy downfield pass attack, right? And DK Metcalf absolutely shines in that area. And honestly, Geno Smith has been really good in that area too. He has 40 downfield passing touchdowns over the last 2 seasons. That's the second most in the NFL behind only Josh Allen. This Geno Smith might be a really, really nice combo with Ryan Grubb's type of offense. And DK Metcalf is the guy who I think will really shine in this offense as well. The Broncos, they're all over the place with their defense. They do have Pat Surtain, but besides that, I'm not scared of anything else. And they lost Justin Simmons to help over the top, right? So I think DK Metcalf is going to get some nice, long, deep catches in this game and come down with at least a touchdown.
Yeah, I just have him a little bit lower because, again, this situation I want to see develop, and I'm not sure the Seahawks are going to need all that much volume to win this game. And if Kenneth Walker is doing well, that's going to help. And yeah, it might come down to Metcalf getting a touchdown for that difference that we have in the rankings, right? I think you can have a solid game overall. They might use him a little bit differently here. But again, Metcalf is solid. You got to put him in your lineup. Again, we both have him as a play that you want to have as a wide receiver too. Now, one guy, this is a good guy to end on in this segment before we get into some later round wide receivers that you would want to play this week. George Pickens at the Falcons. Now, he was at Georgia. He played at Georgia. He made the big play in the championship game down there when he was back healthy. So I think he'll be motivated here. Also try to get going with Russell Wilson and that big arm. They've been kind of holding a few things back, I think, the Steelers. They've shown some signs of breaking out of it. You really can't run as consistently as you would like on the Falcons. So I think George Pickens, something off play action is going to happen for him. So I could easily see DK Metcalf and George Pickens doing something similar. Play action, running game, sets things up, and they get a downfield touchdown.
Yeah, we both have George Pickens ranked at wide receiver 20. The thing with him is I just don't see how he doesn't get 10 targets in this game, right?
Yeah.
And if we're going to project that type of work, then I have to have him ranked as top 20. We'll see how efficient he could be on these targets. We'll see what the Steelers offense looks like. But for now, I'm happy to play George Pickens, especially in a matchup that should be higher scoring. I do think Kirk Cousins in this offense will be able to score on the Steelers defense as well. So that should be a somewhat interesting game to watch, actually. I know I'm a fan, but I do think it could be interesting for everybody to watch. We're going to get into some players that we think you should get into your lineups, even though you drafted them late. If you have any space as a flex, we want to play them in week 1. We'll get into all of that to finish up our episode today, right after this quick break. This episode of Locked On Fantasy Football is brought to you by the Game Time app. Buying tickets to your favorite events shouldn't be stressful. With killer deals on last-minute tickets and their best price guarantee, you can stop stressing over the tickets and start getting hyped for the fun you'll have. I've used this app many, many times because it's just so easy to use, and I always feel very confident with, purchasing with this company. You get images of your receipt before you buy, so you know exactly what to expect when you arrive. So you're never just like, oh my goodness, you get to the stadium, you have no idea where you're sitting, or like something is obstructing your view. You're not going to have that because in Game Time, you literally get to see exactly what your view is of whatever you're trying to watch before you buy. And then you get to buy tickets in a matter of seconds, 2 taps and you're set. And tickets are sent directly to your phone, so you never have to dig through your email. You get to take the guessing work out of buying tickets with Game Time. To buy tickets with Game Time, all you have to do is download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms to apply. Again, that's code LOCKEDONNFL, LOCKEDON NFL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game Time. This show is also sponsored by BetterHelp. Comparison is the thief of joy, and it's easy to envy other people's lives, but therapy can help you focus on what you want instead of what others have so you can start living your best life. I have used therapy, online therapy to be exact, over the past few years, and I cannot say enough good things about it. It's taught me so many amazing things, positive coping skills, and how to set boundaries. It's helped me with my anxiety, my irritability. It really has just empowered me to be the best version of myself. So if you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. All you have to do is fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist, and you don't have to stress because you can switch therapists anytime for no additional charge. Stop comparing and start focusing with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/lockedon today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. Before we get into our a handful of more wide receivers we'd love to play this week, I want to remind everyone that the new Locked On NFL is here. Locked On NFL is now 2 shows every day. First, the madman Tyler Rowland kicks off your morning with a double shot of NFL espresso, and then stop by the barbershop with Tony Wiggins for some real NFL talk. Add in the Locked On local experts, and you get unprecedented NFL insight, hot opinions, detailed breakdowns, and all in 30 minutes. It's the new Locked On NFL, and it's twice a day. Make the madman Tyler Rowland and the barber Tyler Rowland, and the barber Tony Wiggins your second listen at the new Locked On NFL on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast. All right, let's get back into this Eagles. I almost call it Feagles for the Eagles and Green Bay Packers game in Brazil. So we're just going to go with it's going to be a high-scoring game, right? We're not going to worry about all the other conditions. So we have 2 Packers wide receivers that we really like to play this week. Starting off with Christian Watson, we have him ranked very closely, wide receiver 33, and you have him at wide receiver 32. Jaden Reed, I've kind of been all over the place with, not only just for week 1, but this offseason. But I'm going to have Jaden Reed very closely ranked to Christian Watson as well, right around the wide receiver 35 range. But I like both of these players quite a bit going into this matchup.
Yeah, I do like Watson more than Reed. I would feel a little bit more confident playing him because the Eagles did invest a little bit to get their slot coverage, right, with C.J. Gardner-Johnson, trying to get him back. And Jaden Reed, look, he had a big year last year. Almost out of necessity because everyone else was hurt, and he's still a special talent. He's a good slot receiver. And this is a tough situation to navigate through, but I think it's more of a Watson game. Look, they kept James Bradbury. They're a little bit slow on the outside, and Watson is a big play threat. So I like him a little bit more this week. If I had to pick one, if I had both somehow on my roster, I'd say who I'm going to deploy. I'm going to go with Watson this week. So it's just the way I want to see it work out a little bit. I kind of look at the matchups to see the best things we have right now, right, to go on when a lot of these teams are changing. The schemes are different. We know the Eagles have Vic Fangio, so a lot of things are variable here in this first game. So I'm going to trust Watson. I think they're going to make it a point to show that Watson's healthy and try to make a big play here.
Yeah, I definitely see that, and that's why I have him ranked up there, right? I do think he can make some big plays. We saw how bad this Eagles secondary was last year, allowing the most fantasy points to wide receivers, the second most fantasy touchdowns. So I do think there's space for both to be good. I know they put resources into fixing that secondary, but two of those guys are going to be rookies out there. James Bradbury's out, so it's like it could still be a pretty rough start to the secondary for the Eagles. So I like both Christian Watson and Jaden Reed here. We have to remember Jaden Reed. I think he's the best wide receiver on this team. It just comes down to how many snaps he gets, right? As the slot wide receiver. Now, talking about another slot wide receiver I really like this week, Jackson Smith-Njigba against the Broncos. We already brought up DK Metcalf, and we did bring up Kenneth Walker, who we really love for on yesterday's show. But maybe this is just saying take the Seahawks to cover by a lot and score a lot of points in this game. But I have Jackson Smith-Njigba at wide receiver 31. You're a little bit lower at 44. But like besides Pat Surtain, like I brought up, who should be focusing on DK Metcalf, but I think DK Metcalf is also going to get snaps without him on him and have those big plays. But I fully expect JSN to be utilized differently this year than last year. I'm not scared of the Broncos defense. And I just think the Seahawks are just going to beat up on them.
Yeah, this is a good guy that I would take a shot on this week. I mean, if you needed him, I would drop him more to a flex play. I should feel confident in most leagues if you're a player that you have three options that you would want to put ahead of him at wide receiver this particular week, that there's a lot of good matchups in that fringe area. So something to keep in mind. But Jason, look, I think he could have a big year. I'm just not 100% sure what volume he's going to get right away at the start of the season. Again, you want the Broncos to show a little resistance. That may happen, but keep in mind the Seahawks defense also, it could be tough on them in this one. So I'm just a little bit worried about the passing volume. I want to see kind of how this all comes together in this game. So if it was a little bit easier, if I knew it was in a shootout situation, I would feel really great about it. But Jason, right now, I drop him a little bit to be conservative.
So you have Chris Godwin a good bit ahead of JSN. So you'd start Chris Godwin against the Commanders over JSN. I do have JSN ranked 3 spots ahead of Chris Godwin. I have Godwin at 34. So pretty close to where you have Godwin. You have wide receiver 30. It's just you have JSN much lower. Why do you feel, I mean, I guess we both feel pretty, solid about Chris Godwin this week against the Buccaneers. I just, for some reason, Chris Godwin bores me so much that it's just not exciting to play him.
Yeah, it's not exciting, but then you look up and the numbers are not bad, right? When I look at Chris Godwin, I mean, they're going to put him back in his comfort level. They try to pull him out of the slot, and that was a mistake last year. That just did not fly. I mean, he's been a slot his entire career for working with James Winston, Tom Brady. That's where he put up the numbers. So he's back in that comfort zone here. Again, the Commanders are pretty weak everywhere in the secondary at this point. I mean, they're not going to be good in that type of coverage, either inside or outside. So that's going to be good for Chris Godwin. So again, I like all the wide receivers in this game, except for whoever the Commanders decide to put at number 2. I like McLaurin, Evans, Godwin to all come through in rather a pass-heavy, high-scoring game.
Now, one guy that you can start, especially if you're in like a 3 wide receiver league, or you're looking for additional flex here, it's Keon Coleman, another rookie, but for the Bills. And it's scary to play him in week 1, but this matchup is juicy, right? And again, we're not scared of the Cardinals defense whatsoever. They allowed the second most points per game in the NFL last year. They were really bad against wide receivers, allowing a 69.2 catch percentage, the second highest rate to wide receivers last year. And now, yeah, maybe the points go to James Cook, who we talked about yesterday. Maybe they go to Kincaid. We know Josh Allen's going to put up points, whether it be with his arm or his legs. But what if the points go to their wide receiver 1, right? Like they drafted Keon Coleman to be their new wide receiver 1 with Stephon Diggs gone. What if he's the guy that puts up these points with Josh Allen this week? So I kind of like Keon Coleman as a sneaky play. We both have him. I have him ranked wide receiver 37. You have him wide receiver 38. So definitely a flex play, right? We're not going to trust him as a wide receiver 2 spot or anything like that. But he's an interesting sneaky start this week.
Yeah, I talked about the newness of trying to get rookies going and showing them off a little bit, planting a seed in other teams' heads that these guys are going to make big plays. Well, like DJ Moore is going to try to rev up Caleb Williams, or Terry McLaurin is going to help Jaden Daniels. I think Josh Allen is going to try to help Keon Coleman, right? They want to establish that they can still throw the ball downfield, because they also need to show that they can open it up a little bit and use Allen's big arm. Then James Cook in the running game is easier. The intermediate throws to Dalton Kincaid is easier. So they need to stretch the field, at least show they can do that. And I think you can see a big shot off the running game happen, where Allen buying some time, pointing to him downfield, and the kid stretches the field and scores, right? I could definitely see that with Keon Coleman this week. So look, he wasn't the buzz guy that we wanted, right? Okay, it was like they lost Stephon Diggs, they lost Chris or Gabe Davis, so we're going to put this kid in, and he's going to take over as a really nice number one and a wide receiver that we're going to trust in fantasy. That didn't quite materialize, but again, he still can be their top wide receiver. That could be their third target behind Kincaid and Cook, but I think they're going to do everything they can to get Keon Coleman involved this week.
And this is the week to do it, right? Make your rookie feel good. This is a good matchup to do that. All right, well, that is it for our favorite wide receiver plays of the week. Thank you so much for making Locked On Fantasy Football your first listen every day. Everydayers, we will be back tomorrow talking about our favorite quarterback and tight end matchups of the week. Don't miss that. And then on Thursday, we're going to talk about our least favorite plays of the week. So we got to get a little negative on you, but we get a football game that night, so you can handle it. Have a great night, everybody. Bye, y'all.